In the early hours of June 6, 1944, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, Adolf Hitler made a decision that would help seal the fate of Nazi Germany. Despite reports of massive Allied landings on the Norman coast, the Führer refused to release his elite panzer divisions from their positions near Calais, over 200 kilometers to the northeast. He remained convinced, even as thousands of men fought and died on the beaches of Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, that the real invasion would come at Pas de Calais. This conviction would persist for weeks, allowing the Allies to establish their crucial foothold in France. Hitler's certainty was not the product of poor judgment or strategic incompetence. It was the result of the most elaborate and successful military deception in history, a phantom conjured from inflatable rubber, radio transmissions, and pure imagination. The story of Operation Fortitude began not on the fields of southeastern England where ghost armies would gather, but in the minds of British intelligence officers who understood a fundamental truth about modern warfare. In an age of aerial reconnaissance and signals intelligence, the enemy's perception of reality could be more powerful than reality itself. By early 1944, the Allied High Command faced an extraordinary challenge. The invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, Operation Overlord, was the most ambitious amphibious assault ever conceived. Its success depended on achieving surprise and preventing German reinforcements from overwhelming the invasion beaches before the Allies could establish a secure beachhead. But surprise seemed impossible. The Germans knew an invasion was coming. They had fortified the entire Atlantic coastline with the formidable defenses of the Atlantic Wall. The question was not whether the Allies would invade, but where and when. The responsibility for answering this question, or rather, for ensuring the Germans answered it incorrectly, fell to a small group of military planners and intelligence officers working under the umbrella of what was called the London Controlling Section. This innocuous name concealed its extraordinary mission, to deceive the entire German military intelligence apparatus. The concept they developed was audacious in its scope. Rather than simply hiding Allied intentions, they would create an entirely false reality, a parallel invasion plan so detailed and convincing that German intelligence would accept it as truth. This plan became Operation Fortitude, divided into two components: Fortitude North, suggesting an invasion of Norway, and Fortitude South. The more critical deception focused on convincing the Germans that the main Allied invasion would strike at Pas de Calais rather than Normandy. The choice of Calais as the fictional target was strategically logical, which made the deception more credible. The Pas de Calais region offered the shortest crossing of the English Channel, barely 20 miles of water separating England from France. It provided the most direct route to Germany itself. The port facilities were superior to those in Normandy. From a purely geographic and logistical standpoint, Calais was indeed the obvious choice for invasion. German military planners, including Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who commanded the Atlantic Wall defenses, believed strongly that Calais would be the primary target. Operation Fortitude's genius lay not in creating an implausible deception, but in reinforcing what German commanders already suspected, making their own strategic assumptions. Their greatest vulnerability, the centerpiece of Fortitude. South was an entity that would come to be known as FUSAG, the First United States Army Group, on paper and in carefully orchestrated intelligence reports reaching German ears. FUSAG was a massive invasion force of over 1 million men, comprising 11 divisions organized into two armies, the 3rd U.S. Army and the 1st Canadian Army. This enormous force was supposedly massing in southeastern England, directly across from Pas de Calais, preparing for the obvious thrust into France. The commander of this mighty force, according to German intelligence, was Lieutenant General George S. Patton, the most famous and feared American general, whose aggressive tactics and battlefield brilliance had already made him legendary after campaigns in North Africa and Sicily. In reality, FUSAG did not exist. Not a single soldier, tank, or artillery piece belonged to this phantom army. Yet by D-Day, German intelligence had identified FUSAG as the primary threat to the Reich, tracking its movements, assessing its capabilities, and warning Hitler's high command that when this force struck at Calais, it would represent the true Allied main effort. The Germans believed in FUSAG so completely that they positioned the elite 15th Army, the strongest German force in France, comprising 19 divisions, in Pas de Calais to counter it. These divisions would remain largely idle as the battle for Normandy raged, waiting for an invasion that would never come, defending against an army that did not exist. Creating this phantom force required not just imagination, but an unprecedented coordination of deception techniques across multiple domains. The British had learned, through their greatest intelligence triumph, the breaking of the German Enigma codes, exactly what information German intelligence was collecting and how they were interpreting it. This knowledge, obtained through the Ultra program that remained one of the war's most closely guarded secrets, allowed the Allies to understand precisely what evidence the Germans would find convincing. They could see German intelligence reports, read assessments of Allied strength and intentions, and most critically, verify that their deception was working. It was as if they could peer over the enemy's shoulder while he analyzed intelligence reports, allowing them to adjust their deception in real time to reinforce German misconceptions. The physical creation of FUSAG began in the fields and harbors of southeastern England, where a different kind of army assembled. This force consisted not of soldiers but of artists, set designers, engineers, and soldiers from specialized deception units including the British, units of the Royal Engineers, and the American 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, units that would later be nicknamed the Ghost Army. Their mission was to create the visual evidence of a massive military buildup that German reconnaissance aircraft and agents would observe. What they constructed was a masterpiece of theatrical illusion adapted for the age of aerial photography. Across the countryside of Kent, Sussex, and Essex, entire military bases materialized. From the air, they appeared to be bustling with activity. Rows of tanks were parked in neat formations. Artillery pieces stood ready in emplacements. Aircraft filled airfields. Ships and landing craft crowded harbors and estuaries. But these weapons of war shared a peculiar characteristic. They were remarkably lightweight. The tanks were inflatable rubber constructions, designed by engineers who understood the principles of aerial photography. From 5,000 feet, the minimum altitude German reconnaissance aircraft could maintain without being shot down by Allied fighters, these inflatable tanks, mounted on wooden frames, appeared identical to real Sherman tanks or Churchill tanks. The aircraft crowded on airfields were plywood and canvas constructions, built to precise specifications and painted with careful attention to shadow and highlight. Landing craft in harbors were wooden frameworks covered with canvas, floating on barrels for buoyancy. The construction of these decoys required remarkable attention to detail. Engineers studied aerial reconnaissance photographs to understand exactly what German interpreters would be looking for. They learned that tracks in the mud around vehicles, blast marks from artillery tests, and even patterns of wear on grass where troops supposedly practiced drills all contributed to an installation's apparent authenticity. Consequently, the deception units created these details methodically. They drove trucks around inflatable tanks to create realistic track patterns. They scorched earth around fake artillery positions to simulate firing. They wore paths through grass in patterns consistent with military training activities. At one installation, troops even hung laundry on lines strung between non-existent barracks, creating the domestic evidence of a camp filled with soldiers. The effort required to maintain these illusions was substantial. Inflatable tanks needed regular inflation to maintain their shape. Damage from wind or curious animals required repair. The entire Phantom Army needed to appear to shift and evolve as a real military force would. Equipment would appear to move from one location to another, simulating the repositioning of units. Old installations would be deliberately allowed to look abandoned while new ones would spring up elsewhere, creating the impression of a dynamic force conducting realistic training and preparation. Specially assigned personnel would periodically move vehicles or reconfigure displays to prevent the installations from looking suspiciously static in sequential reconnaissance photographs. But visual deception alone would not convince German intelligence. The Phantom Army needed to sound real as well. This requirement led to one of Fortitude's most sophisticated elements, the creation of an entirely fictional radio network. Military communications in 1944 relied heavily on radio transmissions, and German signals intelligence units were highly skilled at intercepting these communications, using them to identify units, determine their locations through direction finding, and assess their activities based on volume and pattern of traffic. The Allies understood that German signals intelligence would be listening, and they orchestrated an elaborate radio symphony for this invisible audience. Special signals units began broadcasting fictional communications, simulating the radio traffic of FUSAG's component units. These transmissions followed careful scripts designed to create realistic patterns. A division's radio network would first appear with low-volume traffic, simulating a unit in garrison. Traffic volume would gradually increase, suggesting intensifying training and preparation. Communications would indicate logistical activities, requests for supplies, maintenance reports, personnel movements. Fictional commanders would issue orders to fictional subordinates. The radio operators conducting this deception had studied actual military communications patterns extensively, learning the distinctive characteristics of different unit types. An armored division's radio traffic differed from an infantry division's in volume, frequency of transmissions, and technical content. These patterns were carefully reproduced. The radio deception extended to extraordinary detail. Each fictional unit was assigned call signs and frequencies consistent with actual Allied communications procedures. Traffic was encrypted using actual Allied codes and ciphers, knowing that while the Germans might intercept these messages, they could not decrypt them, but the very presence of encrypted traffic in expected patterns and volumes would provide intelligence about unit presence and activity. Radio operators developed distinctive transmitting characteristics, fists and radio jargon, so that German signals intelligence. Tracking individual operators would observe consistent operators associated with specific units, exactly as they would with real formations. The radio network needed to evolve realistically over time. As the fictional invasion preparation progressed, traffic patterns would change. Radio silence exercises would be conducted, with entire segments of the network going dark for periods, then resuming, exactly as real units would practice to prepare for the invasion when radio silence would be essential. The network would simulate problems, technical difficulties, operator errors, even breaches of radio discipline that would be curtly corrected by fictional commanding officers. These imperfections made the deception more credible. A perfect network would have seemed suspicious. One that exhibited the normal friction of military operations appeared authentic. To support both the physical and radio deception, the Allies mobilized significant resources. Real military units were assigned to areas associated with FUSAG, deliberately positioning genuine forces where they would be observed and counted by German intelligence, allowing the enemy to conclude that these observed forces were merely a small portion of the larger FUSAG formation. Senior officers made publicized visits to southeastern England. Training exercises were conducted in areas associated with FUSAG's fictional concentration. Administrative apparatus was established, addresses, postal codes, even fictional newspaper stories about incidents involving FUSAG units were created, understanding that such details might reach German intelligence through neutral channels. The selection of George Patton as FUSAG's fictional commander was perhaps the deception's most brilliant psychological element. Patton was known to the Germans as America's most aggressive and successful battlefield commander. In Sicily and Italy, he had demonstrated exactly the kind of bold, armored warfare that German generals understood and respected. His relief from command following the infamous slapping incident when he struck hospitalized soldiers suffering from what was then called battle fatigue was well known but assumed by German intelligence to be temporary, a political necessity that would not keep such a talented commander from playing a crucial role in the invasion. When German intelligence identified Patton in southeastern England, it confirmed their assessment that FUSAG represented the main Allied effort. They could not imagine the Allies' best general being assigned to anything less than the primary invasion force. In reality, Patton had been assigned to command the Third Army, which would enter combat in France only after the beachhead was secure. But before that activation, he played his role in the deception with theatrical flair. He made appearances at FUSAG locations, delivering speeches to troops who were not part of FUSAG, but whose presence would be reported to German intelligence. He met with civilian leaders in southeastern England, fostering the impression that he was preparing the region for the massive military buildup under his command. British intelligence even arranged for carefully controlled leaks, suggesting Patton's appointment to FUSAG command. Knowing that information German intelligence had to work to obtain was more credible than information too easily provided. Yet the most critical component of Operation Fortitude was not rubber tanks. Radio broadcasts, or even the presence of famous generals. It was the network of double agents who fed German intelligence a steady diet of carefully crafted lies, and whose reporting was so valued by the Germans that it shaped the entire enemy intelligence assessment of Allied intentions. The double-agent network that made Operation Fortitude possible represented perhaps the most remarkable counterintelligence achievement in the history of espionage. By 1944, British intelligence, specifically the 20 Committee, also known as the double-cross system, had achieved something unprecedented. They had captured or turned virtually every German agent operating in Britain. This was not an exaggeration or estimate. Through a combination of signals intelligence from decrypted German communications, methodical counterintelligence work, and some fortunate breaks, the British had identified the entire German espionage network in the United Kingdom. Rather than simply arresting these agents, British intelligence offered them a choice: death or cooperation. Most chose cooperation, becoming double agents who would transmit to their German handlers precisely what the British wanted them to report. This comprehensive control of enemy intelligence collection in Britain provided an extraordinary opportunity. The Germans believed they had extensive intelligence coverage of the British Isles through their agent network. In reality, every report their agents sent was crafted by British intelligence. The 20 Committee could control what the Germans knew about Allied activities in Britain with near-perfect precision. This capability would become the foundation of Fortitude's success. The Germans would believe in FUSAG not primarily because of reconnaissance photographs or radio intercepts, but because their trusted agents reported its existence, movements, and preparations in extensive detail. Among the network of double agents, none was more critical to Operation Fortitude than the man the Germans knew as Agent Arabelle, and whom British intelligence called Garbo. His real name was Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spanish anti-fascist who had approached British intelligence in 1941 offering his services. Initially rejected, Pujol had decided to demonstrate his value by freelancing. Operating from Lisbon, without ever setting foot in Britain, he began sending intelligence reports to the Germans claiming to be a Spanish official recruited by the Abwehr, German military intelligence, who had traveled to Britain and was operating as a spy. His early reports were fabrications assembled from guidebooks, magazines, and pure imagination. He reported on British military preparations, rationing conditions, and public morale, all invented at his desk in Portugal. The remarkable aspect of this deception was that the Germans believed him. His reports were well written, detailed, and confirmed certain things German intelligence already believed about Britain. The Abwehr valued him as one of their most productive agents. British intelligence, monitoring German communications through ultra-decrypts, began noticing frequent references to intelligence from an extremely productive agent operating in Britain. An agent they knew did not exist. The quality of the fictional intelligence being sent by this freelance double agent, operating without any official support, was so high that the British became concerned. They also recognized an opportunity. In 1942, they established contact with Pujol and brought him to London, where he became Agent Garbo, operating under complete British control. Under British management, Garbo's network expanded dramatically. Working with his MI5 handler, Thomas Harris, Garbo created an entire fictional network of sub-agents supposedly reporting to him from various locations across Britain. By 1944, this network had grown to include 27 fictional sub-agents, each with detailed personalities, backgrounds, and areas of access. The Germans believed Garbo controlled a network of informants in military bases, ports, government offices, and industrial facilities across Britain. In reality, every report from every supposed sub-agent was carefully composed by Garbo and Harris, designed to build an intelligence picture that supported Allied deception plans. The elaborate nature of Garbo's fictional network required extraordinary attention to continuity and detail. Each sub-agent had to behave consistently with their supposed personality and situation. One sub-agent was portrayed as a Welsh nationalist with anti-English sentiments who nevertheless provided useful intelligence. Another was supposedly a wealthy Venezuelan living in London with social connections to military and government officials. A third was portrayed as a commercial traveler whose business required movement around the country, allowing him to report on military activities in various locations. Each had families, financial concerns, personal conflicts, all fictional, all meticulously documented in files that Garbo and Harris maintained to ensure consistency in the elaborate fabrication. The Germans paid Garbo substantial sums for his intelligence, money that was actually deposited in bank accounts controlled by British intelligence. This financial arrangement had to be maintained realistically, including occasional complaints from sub-agents demanding more money, negotiations over payment amounts, and explanations of expenses. Garbo would transmit requests for funds to cover his network's expenses, and the Germans would arrange transfers through neutral countries. These financial transactions, monitored by British intelligence, provided additional confirmation that the Germans viewed Garbo's network as genuine and valuable. As Operation Fortitude development progressed in late 1943 and early 1944, Garbo's network became the primary channel for feeding the Germans information about FUSAG. His sub-agents began reporting the arrival of American units in southeastern England. They observed and reported on the formation of what appeared to be a massive new army group. They noted the presence of General Patton. They described training exercises, equipment concentrations, and preparations that all pointed toward a major operation targeting the Pas-de-Calais region. Each report was carefully calibrated to be believable, neither too detailed nor too vague, sometimes containing minor errors or inconsistencies that would be expected from a real network of amateur observers, making the intelligence seem more authentic. The British carefully controlled the pace and content of Garbo's reports about FUSAG. Too much information too quickly would seem suspicious. Too little would fail to achieve the deception's objectives. The reports needed to arrive in patterns consistent with how such information would realistically be gathered. A sub-agent couldn't report detailed information about a military installation unless he had a plausible reason to access that area. Information gathering needed to show realistic delays. A sub-agent would report seeing something, but his report wouldn't reach Garbo immediately, and Garbo wouldn't always be able to transmit to his German handlers immediately, creating realistic lag times between observation and reporting. Other double agents contributed to the FUSAG deception. Agent Brutus, a Polish Air Force officer in London, reported from his supposed position with Polish forces. Agent Tate, who had been captured after parachuting into Britain in 1940, sent radio reports from his fictional position in southeastern England. Each double agent's reporting was coordinated by the 20 Committee to ensure consistency. The Germans were receiving reports about FUSAG from multiple apparently independent sources, a convergence of intelligence that greatly enhanced credibility. When different agents reported seeing elements of the same military units in the same locations, German intelligence analysts had every reason to conclude this was genuine intelligence from independent sources. Not knowing that every agent was under British control and every report carefully coordinated, the double-agent network also served to discredit accurate German intelligence. When German reconnaissance aircraft occasionally photographed actual Allied invasion preparations in southwestern England and the Portsmouth area, preparations for the real Normandy invasion, double agents would report that these were merely secondary formations, diversionary forces or logistical elements supporting the main FUSAG force in the southeast. They characterized the actual invasion preparations as exactly what the Germans wanted to believe. A deception intended to draw German attention away from the real invasion at Calais. The pinnacle of Garbo's contribution to Operation Fortitude came in the hours before D-Day. On the night of June 5-6, 1944, as Allied invasion forces crossed the English Channel toward Normandy, Garbo transmitted an urgent message to his German handlers. The message detailed massive troop movements and heightened activity, suggesting an imminent operation. Crucially, however, the message arrived too late for the Germans to react. Garbo's transmission was deliberately delayed to ensure it reached the Germans only after the invasion had begun, creating the impression that Garbo had tried to warn them, but circumstances had prevented timelier communication. This timing was carefully calculated. It demonstrated Garbo's continued diligence and value as an intelligence source, while avoiding any possibility that his warning might actually help the Germans defend against the Normandy landings. More importantly, on June 9th, 3 days after D-Day, with Allied forces fighting desperately to expand their Normandy beachhead, Garbo transmitted what would become perhaps the most influential intelligence message of the entire war. Drawing on reports from his entire fictional network and presenting an elaborate analysis, Garbo warned the Germans that the Normandy invasion was a diversion. The real invasion, he reported, was still coming at Pas-de-Calais. Fusag remained in southeastern England, poised for the main attack. The Normandy operation, despite its scale and intensity, was designed to draw German reserves away from Calais, weakening the defenses at the actual invasion site. Garbo urged the Germans not to be deceived by the Normandy fighting. The main event was yet to come. This message reached German high command at a critical moment. Hitler and his commanders were debating whether to release the strategic reserve, particularly the elite panzer divisions held near Calais, to counterattack the Normandy beachhead. Some commanders argued for immediate commitment of these forces to drive the Allies back into the sea while the invasion was still vulnerable. But Garbo's message, combined with continuing intelligence about Fusag's readiness, persuaded Hitler and the German High Command to hold the Calais reserves in place. They could not risk weakening Calais defenses against what they believed was the imminent main invasion, only to then face that invasion with inadequate forces. The impact of this decision on the Battle of Normandy cannot be overstated. The German 15th Army, comprising hundreds of thousands of soldiers and the best armored divisions in France, remained largely inactive in the Pas-de-Calais region for weeks after D-Day. These forces could potentially have turned the tide in Normandy, overwhelming Allied beachheads that were frantically being reinforced, but remained vulnerable to determined counterattack. Instead, they waited for an invasion that would never come, defending against an army that did not exist, paralyzed by their conviction that Operation Fortitude's phantom force represented the real threat. The success of Garbo's June 9th message can be verified through German records and decrypted communications. German intelligence assessments continued to reference Fusag as a major threat throughout June and into July 1944. Orders to divisions in the Calais area emphasized maintaining readiness for the expected Allied main effort. Hitler himself remained convinced that Normandy was secondary to the coming Calais invasion. This conviction persisted even as the strategic situation became increasingly desperate for Germany, even as Allied forces broke out of Normandy and began racing across France. The deception had achieved something remarkable. It had caused the enemy to persistently believe a falsehood even when contradictory evidence was mounting, because the initial deception had been so comprehensive and convincing that abandoning that belief required admitting a failure of intelligence assessment so profound it seemed less plausible than the original deception. The validation of Garbo's network reached its culmination when German intelligence awarded him the Iron Cross in July 1944, one of Germany's highest military decorations for his supposedly invaluable intelligence work. This award was particularly ironic given that Garbo would also receive an MBE, Member of the Order of the British Empire, from King George VI for his actual work deceiving the Germans. He remains one of the few individuals to have received high honors from both sides in World War II, though the Germans never learned that their award had been given to a man who had systematically deceived them throughout the war's most critical period. The true measure of Operation Fortitude's success lies not in its elaborate construction, but in its strategic impact on the war's most decisive campaign. When Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, they faced formidable German defenses. The Atlantic Wall fortifications, while incomplete, included extensive obstacles, minefields, concrete bunkers, and artillery positions designed to annihilate invasion forces on the beaches. The initial hours of the invasion were desperate and bloody, particularly at Omaha Beach, where American forces faced elite German defenders in excellent defensive positions. The outcome hung in balance throughout D-Day, and had German strategic reserves been immediately committed to counterattack, the invasion could have been defeated, but those reserves did not arrive. The German 15th Army, positioned to defend Pas-de-Calais, was not released to counterattack Normandy. Panzer divisions that could have reached the invasion beaches within days instead remained in the Calais area, their commanders believing that committing them to Normandy would leave Calais vulnerable to the main Allied invasion force, the fictional Fusag, which their intelligence indicated was still poised to strike. This hesitation provided the Allies with the critical time needed to establish their beachhead, bring reinforcements ashore, and begin building the logistical infrastructure necessary to sustain operations in France. The deception continued to provide benefits for weeks after D-Day. As Allied forces fought to break out of the initial beachhead, They faced determined German resistance from units that had been in Normandy or nearby areas when the invasion began. But reinforcements that should have reached Normandy quickly instead moved slowly or not at all. German commanders were receiving contradictory orders, some calling for reinforcement of the Normandy front, others insisting on maintaining forces in the Calais area against the expected Fusag invasion. This command confusion, driven by Germany's false intelligence picture, significantly delayed the German response to the Normandy invasion. Historical analysis by military. Historians suggest that Operation Fortitude's strategic deception resulted in German forces in the Pas de Calais area remaining largely inactive until late July 1944, nearly 2 months after D-Day. During this period, approximately 19 German divisions that could potentially have been committed to the Battle of Normandy instead remained tied down by the threat of a phantom army. The Allied forces fighting in Normandy consequently faced perhaps half the opposition they might have encountered had these additional German divisions been available. The impact on Allied casualties was significant. While the Battle of Normandy was still bloody and costly, Allied losses would almost certainly have been substantially higher had German forces been able to concentrate all available units against the beachhead without the constraint imposed by the fictional Fusag threat. The success of Fortitude also had psychological and political dimensions beyond immediate battlefield impact. The deception demonstrated Allied superiority in intelligence warfare, confirming that the Allies had achieved such comprehensive penetration of German intelligence networks that they could systematically control the enemy's strategic assessments. This realization, when it eventually became clear to German commanders, contributed to a broader erosion of confidence in their intelligence services. If German intelligence had been so thoroughly deceived about something as fundamental as the invasion's location and the existence of an entire army group, what other assessments might be equally flawed? This uncertainty undermined German strategic planning throughout the remainder of the war. For the Allied intelligence community, Operation Fortitude became a template for deception operations. The lessons learned informed subsequent operations and contributed to the development of deception doctrine that military forces continue to study. Several principles emerged from Fortitude's success. First, effective deception requires comprehensive control of the intelligence picture, knowing what the enemy is observing and shaping those observations to support the deception narrative. Second, deception is most effective when it reinforces the enemy's existing beliefs and assumptions, rather than trying to convince them of something entirely implausible. Third, multi-layered deception using diverse channels, visual, signals, human intelligence, provides mutual reinforcement that dramatically enhances credibility. Fourth, persistence and consistency over time are essential. Deception cannot be a one-time effort, but must be sustained through an extended operation. The human cost saved by Operation Fortitude, while impossible to calculate precisely, was substantial. Military historians and analysts have attempted various estimates of how the Battle of Normandy might have unfolded without Fortitude's deception delaying German reinforcements. These analyses generally conclude that Allied casualties could have been 50% higher or more without the deception's effects, potentially resulting in tens of thousands of additional Allied casualties. Beyond casualties, there was genuine risk that without Fortitude's success, the Normandy invasion might have been defeated entirely or at minimum severely delayed in its objectives, potentially extending the European war by months and resulting in hundreds of thousands of additional casualties on all sides. The operation also had significant implications for the individuals involved. For Juan Pujol Garcia, Agent Garbo, his wartime service remained secret for decades after the war. Concerned about potential reprisals from surviving Nazi sympathizers who might learn of his role, Pujol disappeared after the war. British intelligence helped him fabricate his death, and he lived quietly in Venezuela, his remarkable wartime service unknown even to his own family for many years. Only in the 1980s was his story revealed, when he was finally able to acknowledge his role in one of history's greatest deceptions. He lived until 1988. Long enough to see his contributions to Allied victory recognized and appreciated. The members of the deception units who created the physical evidence of Fusag, the Ghost Army and British deception units, also remained largely anonymous for decades. Their work was classified long after the war ended. as military planners believed the techniques and methods they had developed might be needed in future conflicts. Many veterans of these units lived entire post-war lives without being able to discuss their actual wartime service, maintaining cover stories about having been in conventional military units. Only when the classified status of these operations was lifted in later decades could their remarkable creativity and contribution to victory be properly acknowledged. The double agents of the 20 Committee faced complex post-war situations. Some, like Garbo, disappeared into anonymity for their own safety. Others returned to their home countries, carrying secrets they could not share. The German handlers they had deceived never learned that their trusted agents had been controlled by British intelligence. Some German intelligence officers went to their graves, believing they had received genuine intelligence from agents who had actually been working against them throughout the war. This uncertainty itself became a lasting legacy of the deception. German intelligence officers could never be entirely certain which of their agents had been genuine and which had been controlled by the Allies, creating a permanent cloud of suspicion over their wartime intelligence assessments. Operation Fortitude also demonstrated the vulnerability of even sophisticated intelligence organizations to systematic deception when the deceiver controls the information environment. German intelligence during World War II was generally competent and, in some areas, quite sophisticated. The Abwehr included experienced intelligence officers who understood the principles of intelligence analysis and source evaluation. Yet they were systematically deceived because the Allies had achieved something the Germans apparently did not believe possible: comprehensive control of the enemy's intelligence collection apparatus within Britain. The Germans continued to trust their agent network because they could not conceive that virtually every agent had been compromised. This failure of imagination, the inability to consider that what seemed impossible might have been achieved, became a critical blind spot. The operation's legacy in military doctrine is significant. Modern military forces study Operation Fortitude as a masterclass in strategic deception, and many of its principles have been incorporated into contemporary information operations and military deception planning. The integration of multiple deception channels, the importance of understanding enemy intelligence collection methods, the value of persistent long-term deception rather than tactical tricks, and the psychological aspects of reinforcing enemy preconceptions rather than fighting them. All these lessons from Fortitude remain relevant to contemporary military operations. The technological dimensions of the deception also offered lessons that resonated through subsequent decades. The creation of realistic decoys that could deceive aerial reconnaissance anticipated future developments in camouflage and deception technology. The sophisticated radio deception, creating an entire fictional communications network, prefigured electronic warfare and cyber operations where creating false digital signatures or network activity would become crucial capabilities. The understanding that enemy intelligence gathering creates opportunities for deception, that every sensor or collection method that observes you also provides a channel through which you can deceive, became foundational to modern information operations. Ethical discussions of Operation Fortitude occasionally arise in military ethics and just war theory contexts. The operation represented systematic, large-scale deception targeting enemy military forces. Some scholars have examined whether such deception is consistent with principles of honorable warfare, though most analysis concludes that military deception targeting enemy combatants to reduce casualties on both sides is ethically justified and indeed preferable to straightforward combat that would result in higher casualties. The operation is generally viewed as an example of intelligence and creativity achieving military objectives while potentially reducing the human cost of war. The financial cost of Operation Fortitude was remarkably modest compared to its strategic value. While precise accounting is difficult, the resources devoted to the deception, the personnel, materials for decoys, communication facilities for double agents, and operational costs were minimal compared to the cost of conventional military operations. A small investment in creative deception produced strategic effects comparable to what might have required additional divisions of troops, thousands of aircraft, or prolonged combat operations. This efficiency ratio, strategic impact per resource invested, makes Operation Fortitude one of history's most cost-effective military operations. On July 25, 1944, as Allied forces finally broke out of the Normandy beachhead in Operation Cobra, beginning the rapid advance across France that would liberate Western Europe. The German 15th Army in Pas-de-Calais still maintained alert posture against the expected invasion by Fusag. Even at this late date, nearly 2 months after D-Day, German intelligence assessments still referenced the threat posed by Patton's army group in southeastern England. The Phantom Army had held German strategic reserves inactive through the most critical phase of the Normandy campaign. Perhaps the most significant contribution any non-existent military force has ever made to victory. The story of Operation Fortitude reveals profound truths about warfare, intelligence, and human psychology. It demonstrates that in conflict, perception can be more powerful than physical force. An enemy who believes he faces a threat will allocate resources and make decisions to counter that threat regardless of whether it actually exists. The force that controls information, particularly the intelligence information reaching enemy commanders, possesses a strategic advantage potentially greater than superiority in weapons or numbers. Operation Fortitude showed that a small group of creative intelligence officers, working with limited physical resources but comprehensive understanding of enemy intelligence methods, could systematically deceive an entire military establishment, causing an enemy to make strategic decisions fundamentally contrary to his actual interests. The operation also illuminates the nature of modern intelligence warfare. In an era of sensors, signals intelligence, and aerial reconnaissance, armies leave extensive signatures, electronic, visual, thermal, acoustic, that reveal their presence and activities. These signatures create vulnerabilities, allowing enemies to track force movements and capabilities. But these same signatures also create opportunities. If you understand what signatures the enemy can detect and how he will interpret them, you can deliberately create false signatures, painting a picture of reality that suits your purposes rather than his. Operation Fortitude was perhaps the first fully realized application of this principle, the deliberate creation of a complete false intelligence picture across multiple collection domains, systematically exploiting the enemy's intelligence capabilities to deceive him. The human dimension of the operation, the double agents who lived their covers, the radio operators who breathed life into phantom units, the engineers who created armies from canvas and rubber, reminds us that even in an age of technological warfare, human creativity and dedication remain decisive. The individuals who executed Operation Fortitude demonstrated remarkable ingenuity, attention to detail, and perseverance. They had to maintain complex deceptions over months, ensuring consistency, adapting to changing circumstances, and managing countless details. Their success came not from brilliant technology or overwhelming resources, but from patient, meticulous work guided by clear strategic purpose. For contemporary military forces and intelligence services, Operation Fortitude offers enduring lessons. In an age of satellite reconnaissance, cyber operations, and sophisticated intelligence collection, the principles of deception remain relevant. Modern militaries still seek to deceive enemies about capabilities, intentions, and force dispositions. The methods have evolved. Today's deception might involve cyber operations, electronic warfare, and manipulation of digital signatures rather than inflatable tanks. But the fundamental principles remain. Understand what the enemy can observe, control the information environment, reinforce enemy preconceptions, maintain consistency across all channels, and persist through time until the deception achieves its strategic purpose. The technological evolution since 1944 has made some aspects of military deception more challenging while opening new possibilities. Satellite reconnaissance provides continuous surveillance that would make the physical aspects of Operation Fortitude, inflatable tanks and plywood aircraft, far more difficult to sustain today. Modern imaging technology can detect details that aerial reconnaissance in 1944 could not observe. Yet this same technological sophistication creates new vulnerabilities and deception opportunities. Digital signatures can be spoofed, cyber activities can be masked or falsely attributed, electronic emissions can be fabricated, and the sheer volume of information available to modern intelligence analysts creates opportunities to hide truth within complexity or to overwhelm analysis with carefully crafted false data. The information environment of the 21st century has also transformed aspects of military deception. In 1944, controlling information meant managing what German reconnaissance aircraft photographed, what signals intelligence intercepted, and what double agents reported. Today's information environment includes social media, commercial satellite imagery, open-source intelligence, and countless other channels. Modern deception must account for this dramatically expanded information landscape. Yet this complexity also provides opportunities. The proliferation of information sources means that even sophisticated adversaries struggle to distinguish genuine intelligence from deception, authentic content from manipulation. Operation Fortitude's legacy extends beyond strictly military applications. The principles of comprehensive deception, multi-channel reinforcement, and exploitation of target preconceptions apply to contexts ranging from corporate competitive intelligence to political campaigns. Understanding how organizations form assessments based on available information and how those assessment processes can be influenced has become relevant to numerous fields. While ethical considerations obviously apply differently in various contexts, the fundamental insight that controlling the information reaching decision-makers powerfully shapes their choices remains universally relevant. Today, Operation also speaks to the nature of trust and verification in intelligence. German intelligence officers trusted their agent networks because those networks had previously provided accurate intelligence, had been expensive to establish and maintain, and seemed to operate independently of one another. They could not easily verify agent reports because those reports concerned activities in enemy territory where direct verification was impossible. This situation created vulnerability to systematic deception. The lesson for intelligence services is clear. Trust must be continuously validated, sources must be constantly reevaluated, and intelligence organizations must consider whether their collection methods might be compromised. Yet achieving this skepticism without paralyzing intelligence analysis through excessive doubt represents a difficult balance. The psychological dimensions of Operation Fortitude reveal how cognitive biases and preconceptions can be exploited. German commanders expected the invasion at Calais because it was the logical choice based on geography and military considerations. This expectation created confirmation bias. Intelligence that supported the Calais hypothesis was readily accepted, while contradictory intelligence was explained away or discounted. The deception succeeded not by convincing the Germans of something implausible, but by reinforcing what they already believed, making them more certain of assessments they had already made. This exploitation of confirmation bias remains a powerful tool in deception operations. For students of history, Operation Fortitude illustrates how wars are won not only through combat, but through the integration of intelligence, deception, operations security, and psychological operations with conventional military force. The D-Day invasion succeeded because of naval and air superiority, detailed planning, logistical excellence, and the courage of soldiers who stormed the beaches. But it also succeeded because German defenders were surprised, reinforcements were delayed, and strategic reserves were misallocated, outcomes achieved through Operation Fortitude. Military success rarely results from a single factor, but from the effective integration of multiple capabilities, of which deception was in this case a critical component. The individuals who planned and executed Operation Fortitude deserve recognition not as magicians or tricksters, but as military professionals who understood that their craft extended beyond straightforward combat to include the systematic manipulation of enemy perceptions. They demonstrated that military effectiveness includes creativity, that solving problems sometimes requires unconventional approaches, and that achieving objectives with minimal casualties is preferable to straightforward confrontation, regardless of how that achievement is accomplished. Their success came from rigorous analysis, careful planning, meticulous execution, and constant adaptation, the same qualities that characterize excellence in conventional military operations. The ultimate tribute to Operation Fortitude's success is that it achieved precisely what its planners intended. It caused the enemy to make strategic decisions that fundamentally undermined his own interests, kept powerful forces inactive during critical battles, delayed responses to actual operations, and contributed directly to Allied victory, while potentially saving thousands or tens of thousands of lives that would have been lost in heavier combat. The Phantom Army that never existed influenced the war's outcome as significantly as many actual divisions that fought across Europe. In the calculus of warfare, where advantage is measured in lives saved and objectives achieved, Operation Fortitude stands as one of the most effective operations of World War II. As we reflect on this remarkable episode, we might consider what it suggests about the nature of power and conflict. Physical force, tanks, aircraft, ships, soldiers, represents obvious power. But information and perception constitute another form of power, sometimes more decisive than physical capabilities. An enemy who misunderstands his situation, misjudges his opponent's intentions, or misallocates his forces based on false intelligence has been defeated before combat begins. Operation Fortitude demonstrated that victory comes to those who not only fight effectively, but who shape the battlefield, including the cognitive battlefield in enemy headquarters, before the first shot is fired, the men and women who created an army from imagination, who gave it form through rubber and radio waves, who sustained it through patient deception, who made it so credible that German intelligence staked strategic assessments on its existence. These individuals changed history. They proved that creativity and intelligence could achieve what divisions of soldiers might not accomplish. They demonstrated that winning wars requires not just courage and strength, but wisdom and cunning. They showed that the most powerful weapon is sometimes not a bomb or bullet, but a carefully crafted lie told to someone who wants to believe it. In the fields of southeastern England, where phantom divisions once assembled, in the radio rooms where imaginary units conversed, in the offices where double agents composed their fictional reports, ordinary people achieved something extraordinary. They built an army that did not exist and used it to win a war that was all too real. They saved lives by deceiving enemies. They shortened the war by extending a deception. They demonstrated that in the ultimate test of nations and ideals, success comes not only to the strong or the brave, but to the clever and the creative. To those who understand that in war, as in all human endeavors, reality is what people believe it to be, and those who control belief control reality itself. The Phantom Army of Operation Fortitude marched through no battlefields, fired no shots, suffered no casualties. Yet its impact on World War II was profound and lasting. It stands as testament to human ingenuity, to the power of deception in warfare, and to the enduring truth that wars are won not only by those who fight hardest, but by those who think most cleverly about how to avoid unnecessary fighting altogether. In the pantheon of military operations, Operation Fortitude occupies a unique place. The greatest army that never existed, the most successful force that never fired a shot, the phantom that helped change the world.